Imagine you are standing in a city of 1 million people, where the walls are thick, the army is strong, the streets are alive, merchants are selling silk, children are playing and scholars are debating on philosophy in the squares, and where all the people feel safe. Then on the horizon, a cloud of dust suddenly appears. This dust cloud made the city inexistent within 72 hours. The city was not just defeated, it was not just occupied, but it was erased. It was totally expunged. The buildings, the libraries, and the people were all totally wiped out. All the river bodies ran black and red. Ran black as a result of the ink from the books they burned, and ran red from the blood of those who tried to flee. One survivor from the city later wrote that he walked for days and did not see or meet a single living soul on the streets. He rather met silence, bones, and the lonely wind moving through the ruins of what was once the greatest cities on earth. Over the course of just a few decades, this happened not just once, not twice, but dozens of times, and across millions of square miles. You are wondering what we are talking about, right? Today we decided to tell you the history of the Mongol Empire, the empire with the largest contiguous land in the history of the world. This narration will unfold the story of how the Mongol Empire rose, how it nearly consumed everything in its path, and why it ultimately stopped just short of total global domination. This empire is one of the most extraordinary and terrifying stories ever lived. Before there was an empire and before there was even a name that the world feared, there was a boy alone in the Mongolian steppe who had absolutely nothing. His name was Temujin. Temujin was only 9 years old when his father was poisoned by a rival clan. Everything his family had, their horses, their livestock, their status, was totally stripped away in an instant, and the clan that his father had led simply abandoned his mother, the widow, and her children. They painfully left them to die in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Winter temperatures on the Mongolian steppe drops to -40 degrees, and imagine having almost nothing to eat. I bet most people would not have survived a single season in such a terrifying situation. But the wonder boy Temujin survived. He survived because he was different from the beginning. He was colder, sharper, and more calculating than anyone around him. As a young teenager, he killed his own half-brother over a piece of food. He did that not out of rage, but out of cold and deliberate logic. His half-brother was a competition, and a competition in a survival situation is always a threat, so the threat had to be eliminated with immediate effect. By the time he was a young man, he had already been captured by enemies and was held in a wooden slave yoke, which was purposely designed to make it impossible for him to sleep, to eat, and to function. But he escaped, went on to rebuild and formed alliances through a combination of ruthless strategy and genuine personal charisma. This made people who met him described him as almost magnetic. Every promise made by him were kept. He also rewarded loyalty with extraordinary generosity and punished betrayal with a totality of violence that made grown men weep. By the time he was in his 40s, Temujin had done what no one in Mongolian history had ever done. He united the tribes, and every clan on the steppe, which included people who had been fighting each other for centuries, now answered to one man, Temujin. In 1206, at a great gathering beside a river, he was given a new name, which is Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The first thing you need to understand about the Mongol army is that everything the world thought it knew about warfare in the 13th century was wrong. The medieval armies were built around the idea of heavily armored knights and fortified cities. The logic was simple. The thick enough walls, the strong enough armor, and the enemy eventually gives up or starves. This had been the pattern for centuries. This same pattern against the Mongols was almost completely useless. The Mongol army did not fight the way anyone expected. They were specialists in what they do, and every single soldier was a horseman. Every soldier had been riding since before he could even walk. They could fire a composite bow with a devastating accuracy at full gallop, and a bow that took years of training to even draw. They also had a range that most enemies had never encountered in battle. They communicated across the chaos of a battlefield using flags, drums, and smoke signals, with a level of coordination that professional European armies would not achieve for another 500 years. But what truly set the Mongols apart was not their weapons or their horses, it was their mindset. Genghis Khan was perhaps the greatest military strategist who ever lived. Apart from that, he made sure to surround himself with generals of comparable genius. These geniuses always studied their enemies thoroughly before every campaign. They studied their habits, their fears, their supply lines, and their internal politics. This gave them a greater chance to exploit every single weakness of their enemies with surgical precision. They used deception on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. They would fake retreats so convincing, so perfectly executed, that their enemy commanders thought they had won, and then charged forward into a trap that closed around them like a fist. They deliberately and systematically used psychological warfare. Before attacking a city, they would send messengers with a simple offer: surrender now, and you will be spared. Resist, and everyone dies. They made it absolutely certain that the world knew they meant every single word in the offer. Words, they say, travels fast, so cities that had never seen a Mongol soldier willingly opened their gates without a fight, simply because they had heard what happened to those who resisted and refused to open their gates. What happened to the ones that did not open their gates were beyond anything human civilization had yet witnessed in organized warfare. The city of Zhengdu, what is today Beijing, was the capital of the Jin dynasty. The Jin dynasty was considered one of the most powerful empires in East Asia. It had walls which were 60 feet high and guided by 400,000 soldiers. All these didn't scare Genghis Khan. He rather surrounded the wall, cut off its supply lines, and waited until the city finally fell. The slaughter went on for so long that travelers who passed through the region months later reported that the plains outside the city were white. This white was not with snow, but with human bones bleached by the sun. When the Mongols reached the great Islamic city of Merv, which by then was one of the largest cities on earth, it was a place of magnificent mosques and libraries which was holding centuries of human knowledge. They killed so many people that one historian at the time estimated the death toll at over 1 million. Modern scholars even debated on the exact numbers, but the bones they have found in the ruins tell a story that numbers alone cannot. One by one, the great civilizations of Central Asia were simply erased. The city of Nishapur, the city of Herat, and the city of Urgench were all dismantled. The Khwarezmian Empire, which stretched from Persia to Afghanistan and had humiliated a Mongol trade delegation, was completely destroyed that it never recovered. The cities it had built over centuries were left as empty ruins in the desert, and some of them are still empty till today. Genghis Khan died in 1227, but what he had built did not stop. It did not even slow down. His sons and grandsons carried the empire further than he had ever reached. After decades of brutal campaign, the Mongols extinguished the Song dynasty and placed Kublai Khan on the dragon throne. The Sun dynasty had its east to China, its south into Persia, into Iraq, and into Syria, its west into Russia, where every major city from Moscow to Kiev was burned to the ground, and the Russian princes who were captured were placed under wooden boards and slowly crushed to death, while the Mongol commanders ate their victory feast on top. Afterwards, they then turned their eyes toward Europe. By 1241, the Mongol army under Batu Khan and his brilliant general Subutai had crossed the Carpathian Mountains in the dead of winter. This was an act that every European military commander would have declared impossible. The Europeans had never seen anything like it. An army that moved this fast, that attacked from multiple directions at once, and that seemed to know their every counter-move before they made it. At the Battle of Legnica in Poland, a combined army of Polish, German, and Templar knights were some of the finest fighting forces in medieval Europe, and they were destroyed in a few hours. The Mongols gathered the ears of the dead to count them for fun. They ended up filling 9 large sacks. At the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, King Bela IV led an army that outnumbered the Mongols. He chose a strong defensive position on a river, and he felt very confident. But Subutai crossed the river at night with part of his force. 40 miles away, while the main Mongol army attacked the bridge as a diversion. When the Hungarians realized what was happening, it was too late. Their army was surrounded and annihilated. King Bela barely escaped with his life, and he was hunted across Europe like an animal. Vienna was next, then Italy, then France. There was genuinely nothing left between the Mongol army and the total conquest of Western Europe. The Pope called for a crusade, but the Holy Roman Emperor prepared for war instead. Across the continent, all people who had heard what happened in Russia and Hungary went to churches and prayed, because there was nothing else to do. In December 1241, Ögedei Khan, the son of Genghis Khan and the ruler of the empire, died. That was it. His death was the only thing that stopped them, because in Mongol, when a ruler dies, the Mongol law requires all the great generals and princes to return to Mongolia for the Kurultai. The Kurultai is the great council that would choose the next leader. This also made Batu Khan and Subutai pulled back from the edge of Western Europe, and they never went back. The politics of succession consumed the empire's energy for the next several years, and by the time the dust settled, the Western campaigns had lost their momentum. The entire trajectory of Western civilization, every nation, every culture, every idea that has come out of Europe in the last 800 years may have hinged on the liver of Ögedei Khan giving out when it did. If he had lived another 5 years, the continent that would eventually produce the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the Americas as we know them, would have looked very different, or wouldn't exist at all. The Mongol Empire at its peak stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of Germany. It contained more than a quarter of the world's population. It was held together improbably and temporarily by a system of roads and communication that the Romans would have recognized, and a postal relay system so fast that messages could travel the entire length of the empire in days. And then, as all empires do, it began to fracture. The sons of Genghis Khan fought each other, and even the grandsons fought their cousins. The vast territory divided into smaller khanates, each one claiming legitimacy, each one slowly absorbing the culture and religion of the people they had conquered. The Mongols in Persia became Muslims, the Mongols in China became Chinese emperors, and the Golden Horde in Russia became part of the fabric of the land they had once tried to destroy. In less than 200 years from its founding, the greatest empire in the history of the world had dissolved back into the landscape it had once set ablaze. But the world it left behind was permanently changed. The death toll from the Mongol conquests is estimated at somewhere between 30 and 40 million people. This is a number so large that it actually caused a measurable drop in global CO2 levels because so much farmland was abandoned and forests grew back in the silence where cities used to be. In some regions, the population did not even recover for centuries. This made the great intellectual traditions of Central Asia, the libraries, the scholars, and the accumulated wisdom of Islamic civilization at its height set back by hundreds of years. From the same empire came the Pax Mongolica, which was a period of relative peace across Eurasia that allowed trade and ideas to flow from China to Europe on a scale that was never seen before. The Black Plague traveled that network, but so did paper-making, printing, astronomy, and mathematics. Marco Polo walked roads that the Mongols had made safe. The exchange of ideas and technologies that traveled the Silk Road under Mongol protection helped plant seeds that would grow into the Renaissance. But the Mongols did not just destroy, they connected. And the world they connected, which was for better and for catastrophically worse, became the world we live in today. There is a moment in the history of the world when everything changed and when the map got redrawn not by diplomats or philosophers but by sheer, which were terrifying and unstoppable force. The Mongol Empire was that moment for the 13th century. The man who started it was a 9-year-old boy who was abandoned on the steppe with nothing, who looked at the vast, indifferent world around him and decided to conquer it. Although the empire fell, Genghis Khan, in the most literal biological sense possible, never really went away. He is still here, in the DNA of millions of people who will never know his name, in the borders of countries that were redrawn by his armies, in the trade routes that still follow the paths his horses wore into the earth, and in the stories we still tell about a force of nature that looked at civilization and said, "Not enough," almost took over the world, almost. The question that no one can answer, the question that historians have been arguing about for 8 centuries is this: if Ogadai had lived, would almost have become everything? We will never know. And perhaps that is the most terrifying thing of all.